just a really hearty welcome to everybody. I'm really, really pleased that we're all back and we can get this half of the year going. I'm delighted to have Dr. Daphne Lyell in the house tonight. I've been following her on Instagram, and some of you do know Daphne. She's an amazing homeopath and integrated GP. I love your story with medicine, with her travels through her practice, and listening to you over the past few months has just been like such a joy, a really easy integration of your knowledge. So thank you for coming on to my kitchen, and yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's such a lovely, what do we call this? Like a get together, you know, it's so lovely that we can sit together around the kitchen table from all across the world. I think it's beautiful, and it's certainly something that we're not doing enough of, you know, like just sitting and connecting and sitting and communing. And yeah, thank you for inviting me into the space. And it's been really interesting for me being asked to share a little bit of my story and share a little bit of who I am and how I got to this place in how I practice. And it feels in a strange way quite exposing. You know, it is interesting, like sitting with this a bit. Today I was sitting with this a little bit earlier, and I'm going through a process in my family where I've got a very strong, and I think often we do, and this is really something that I find very interesting in the practice to listen to, is how the families that we grew up in and how that initial environment really shapes who we are. Yeah. And it's really something that I bring into the consultation as well. And I'm slowly picking up threads, and I think there's definitely parts of it that feels a bit like you could look at something like family constellations or family systems theory. You know, I'm certainly not the first person to be thinking about this, but it's been really interesting for me to sort of watch people in the practice. And what I really do in practice is I listen to your story and I see what in your story brings you to where you're at. So if I share a little bit about my story, I grew up in the Free State. I actually, as I was sitting this afternoon, I was sort of thinking, how do I describe myself? And it's hard, you know, I mean, so I wrote something, and I'll share this with you a little bit. I'm a farmer's daughter. I'm a farmer's sister. I've recently bought a farm, and I've also sold a farm. Me and farms, we go a long way. The soil and I even further. Mud cakes in neighbors' yards, soil in my nappies from eating hands full of soil. Petrichor, that smell after the rain. The thick sand after the second turn on the road above the house. Walking, running, sunsets, sunrises, talking to self and to others, talking to God and breaking up with exes. On this farm road, I taught myself to whistle, the wolf whistle, the whistle that calls out the Jack Russells from the warthog and the meerkat holes. I digress, let's talk about soil. That wondrous, fertile, dark soil, hot on the surface and cool as I dig my fingers in it. Digging up soil to look for water. Will this crop make it through the wind and the heat? You get back in the bucky, drive home, realize it's not in my hands. What do I trust? So I grew up, thank you. Thank you. I grew up on a farm, and, you know, when I look at it now, it's so interesting because I grew up on a farm that grows GMO crops, you know, and it's so sad because this is the predominant sort of system that we're bought into at the moment. You know, like we're it's like we've forgotten the magic and the marvel that is within the soil, and we've forgotten the magic and the marvel that is within our bodies. You know, we're like, we so mirror in our bodies what's happening in the world, and vice versa. And when my training was, I guess my first sort of training was growing up on a farm and understanding a little bit about cycles and the climate, and understanding a little bit about how we are impacted by the cycles and the seasons. And that was, I think that's a retrospective learning. I didn't catch it, I didn't get it when I was there. But I know, being a farmer's daughter, that how much our livelihood depended on the rain, and on, you know, winter at the right time, frost at the right time. And going from sort of growing up on the farm, I went and I studied homeopathy. And homeopathy was a wonderful, slow opening and realization for me, looking at how the body as a system is impacted by its surrounds, and how we are energetic beings, and how with the smallest energetic sort of matching of that imprint, we can shift again into a place of health. So I often say, when we're unhealthy, we start vibrating at a certain frequency, and the homeopathic medicine can meet you there and allow you to shift back into health and into wellness. And I've had a fascination with life and death from when I was very little. And I finished homeopathy, and my mom asked me, why don't I look at becoming a midwife? Because I've always been interested in birth. And we couldn't, and we still can't actually study midwifery as a direct entry program. You can do that across the world, but you can't do that in South Africa. In South Africa, you have to do the nursing training, become a nurse who specializes in all the different systems, or not specialized, but you rotate through pediatrics and surgery and internal medicine and obstetrics and gynecology, and then you do a bit extra, like you do extra years and months and years and training in that field. So I then thought, I don't actually want to become a nurse, but I could consider becoming a doctor. So I then applied for medicine, and in medicine it was incredible how, coming from farm life and homeopathy, how disjointed everything was. So suddenly everything's broken down into small parts, and you listen to, you know, something's wrong with your heart, you go to the cardiologist, something's with your mind, you go to the psychiatrist or the neurologist, something's wrong with your guts, you go to the gastroenterologist. Like, no one looks at the person. Yeah, and I found that so frustrating. Like, I found that, and I found the suppression of symptoms after having just learned how, with homeopathy, the vital force allows us to express symptoms so that we can see where there's imbalance. And only knocking out these symptoms really felt like, now the tank is empty, we've got a red light coming on, and all we're doing is knocking out the red light. We're certainly not filling up the tank. So finishing medicine, I was quite attracted to the sort of acute medicine. So I worked in Worcester Hospital for 2 years doing my internship, and then I was in Khayelitsha Hospital for ComServe. But I stayed on in Khayelitsha Hospital in the emergency room, which was quite an eye-opener if you talk about life and death, and talking about just the incredible violence that we experience, or a large population of our country experience. In fact, sure, you live in South Africa and you know about violent crime, but growing up in that, like I got an idea of the impact of violence on our people from growing up in that environment. There was actually a fantastic documentary that was shot in the time that I was working there. I wasn't in it, but it really reflected it so well. It's called Knife Crime, Khayelitsha Knife Crime. And it it looks at, it sort of follows around the different people in the different areas. So the man on the street and sort of what he's exposed to, it follows the ambulance crew, and they go to different scenes and they pick them up, and then they follow the guy that's been stabbed and he's in the emergency room, and they follow some of the doctors. And, you know, there's sort of conversation with the different parts of the system, and you just realize how traumatic it actually is living in this country. And when I finished, I kind of got to a point of burnout in Khayelitsha. And the one day we just had this, I had a patient that was, he had status epilepticus. So he was having epileptic fits, and he kind of had them over and over and over. We couldn't stop them. So I was busy with him in the resuscitation area, basically for the whole day, on and off. And I'd finally stabilized him. And by the end of the day, found him a room, or found him a bed, and I'd written up some instructions to the nursing staff. And the next morning I got there, and nothing had been done. He hadn't been tracked. His medication hadn't been given. I walked into the room and he was fitting again. And I just got to a point where I was like, actually, like, I was so angry, and it just feels like you're fighting against thunder, you know, like you can't, like nothing that you're doing is like, it just doesn't have an effect. It feels like you're spilling your blood and your guts in this place, and nothing just gets followed through. And I remember walking past the consultant, and it was really because of the consultant that ran that place, Saad Dari, that I decided to stay on an extra year. And I walked past him, and Saad would very often be, he's an incredible man, and he's one of the best leaders that I've ever seen. And he was such a mensch, and he walked, and he would often just walk past and kind of go, are you okay, or you're not okay? And you can just quickly go yes or no, or help, or, you know, just really responsive. And I walked past him that day, and I was like this, I was just furious. And he kind of called one of my colleagues over, and he said, look, I think, will you just take over this patient from Daphne? And he called me aside and he said, look, I think it's time that you go find birth. Because I'd said to him before that I really love birth, and I would love to be with birth. And in my training through medicine, I got to a point that I kind of went into medicine to be around birth and be with birth and assist women in birth. And I found myself in my 5th year assisting in a hysterectomy, and I was like, ooh, I can't do this. I can be with women in birth, but I certainly don't want to be removing wombs. I don't want to be cutting out wombs. And I found myself quite rudderless. So I guess I kind of skipped that part of the story now, but I guess it was from there where I sort of went into more the emergency medicine side of things. And, you know, I kind of found myself in 5th year without direction. I was like, I'm coming here to do obstetrics and gynecology, to be with birth. And I found so far along the journey that I can't be with it in this way. And Saad pulled me aside that day in the Khayelitsha room, and he just said, go find birth, go find what's working for you. And I stepped out of that environment, and I found a home birth midwife who I worked with then for 18 months. And sort of another layer to this was, I grew up in a very religious home, Christian religious home. In medicine, I found myself in homeopathy. I was exposed to Buddhism and studying in Durban, like a bigger of the Indian population, and sort of started exploring a little bit into, I was part of the School of Practical Philosophy. So I started expanding my thinking a little bit around religion. And I got to a point where I actually left the church. And then in medicine, I went full atheist. Like, I was reading the Richard Dawkins and the, Christopher Hitchens. And I was full, it was medical, it was clinical. As part of like looking after myself, I had an intrauterine device put in. Like, it was just clear. Everything creative and soft was plugged up, and it was just like scientific and cold. And sort of coming through this medical process, then going to a space of home birth, I was absolutely pulled back into a place of awe for the magic of birth and life and death. And it was such a sacred exposure to it, from coming through these paths in Khayelitsha of just the violence and the, there was a very, and still is, a high level of infectious diseases. HIV is rife. There's like TB, there's, young kids that come in with severe diarrhea. So death feels like there's this clawing to hold on to life in that setting. And we're sort of desperately holding on, and death is a failure. Like when there's a patient that dies, like you failed. And coming into a place of the home birth space, suddenly life and death became sacred. And life and death and disability is always invited. And as hard as it is, birth and like death, it's so complex, but it's these things that have been so removed from our society, and we become afraid of it, and we become unsure of it, and we've sort of put it behind the high walls where the doctors can deal with it. And my God, the doctors don't know how to deal with life and birth, like it's just this thing that's a failure, and it's just this thing that's that we fight against. And it's so I feel like we've because we exposed to it so often and so much. Like if you look at the level of or the ratio of patient to doctors, you look at the list of things that you deal with in a night, and you can't actually do it without closing your heart.
Yeah.
So you find this, I kind of want to call it the sausage factory of producing these doctors, but they walk out the other end. I walk out the other end, and our hearts are closed. And it's, I guess, for me, the process of becoming a doctor has been a process of recovering. I'm a recovering doctor, because our system is so harsh, and it's so I did a talk a while ago for the Midwifery and Birth Conference. If you on YouTube, it's on YouTube, watch that. I take you through one night on call, and I take you through like explaining a little bit of what you'd go through as a green intern. Like this is kind of your first exposure to these things. And I explain a little bit in that how we get to this place where you now find yourself going to a doctor in your place of the most vulnerable place, when you're feeling sick, and it might be a terminal illness or it might not, but you find yourself faced with this person that very, very often have closed their hearts in order to survive. And they see you for 15 minutes, and we taught disease. We really are. It's called medicine. I only realized that this year. It's called medicine. Like they don't even lie about it. Like we taught disease so that we can identify what drug to give you.
Yeah.
So it's we literally we're not taught health. And I'm not even like a Bible bashing green hippie. Like it's not. This is really it, and I think it's an incredibly enormous problem that we sit with. That the majority of our system is taught disease. We're not taught health, so we don't know about nutrition. We're not taught nutrition. What were we taught? I was taught the 2 hours of nutrition lectures that I had. We were taught low fat, high carb, the typical SAD, like it's now called this SAD, the sort of food pyramid, and it's so terrible. Like if you look around you and on the masses, this is what you get when you eat like this, So it's so sad that we taught so little about health, and we're sitting in a place where people are confused. Like we're confused about health, and we're confused about wellness, and I think slowly people are coming closer to ourselves, and you start hearing the sort of voices like the Zach Bushes and the Mark Hymans and the sort of bigger names out there of people that are talking a little bit more about creating health. It's certainly the functional medicine movement. We talk a little bit more about health, and it's also in functional medicine, we also talk about a bit more about a system of systems. So we understand that, the different systems within the body, it's more the vitalistic approach as opposed to the mechanistic approach. And the mechanistic approach is the one where we've broken all the pieces apart. And the vitalistic is we look at the system as a whole and how the system integrates and talks to each other. And so that's sort of more the approach of your integrative doctors and your functional medicine doctors. And I think when we then stop and when I sit at and listen in the practice, I think we've complicated things a lot, and we very often the body is very clear. You've got recurrent sore throats, like very often when I just say, what are you not saying? Like, what are you swallowing? Like we get to such brick stuff. We get these, the body is so clear in its conversation and how it speaks to us and how it is trying to express what's out of balance, but we've unlearned how to listen to it because we've broken it into parts.
Yeah. And I mean, the system, the whole medical system on the Western sphere is about separation. It's not about bringing together.
And in smaller and smaller parts. We're looking at smaller and smaller parts until we look at the genetics and we try and figure out what these guys are expressing. And now, fortunately, I mean, when Craig Venter and his team, when they finally got the full human genome, they thought they'd cracked the code. And it's wonderful to just see how we kind of looking and going, oh my gosh, now we know even less, because now we need to look at the sort of the levels of it, because and we start realizing that the body expresses things as a result of the whole exposome. I think it's such a wonderful term. The exposome is everything externally and internally that you're exposing your body to. So that is literally everything. How much am I sleeping? How much am I eating? What time of day or night am I getting up? How much am I exercising? What air am I breathing? What water am I drinking? What food am I eating? What am I listening to? What are my relationships like? So it's literally the total exposome, and all of it, like how many animals do you have? You're exposed to their microbiome, and we start looking at our microbiome. But it's really wonderful when you start looking at this, like you just realize that the body is just absolutely amazingly intelligent, and it's just constantly in conversation. And I think bringing it down to prescribing an antibiotic for everything that moves and is following that up with a steroid, it's ridiculous. Like we realize we're killing off the microbiome that we're so interdependent on. And in fact, the microbiome makes up something like 90% of our genome. Like we not only our cellular genome, it's us and all these like hundreds of trillions of cells that are in and on us, and we are so interdependent. And we are certainly slowly seeing that these ideas of sort of the thoughts around hygiene theory and looking at how we thought we were clever by bringing in everything antibacterial, like we're paying a price for it. We're seeing the rise of the allergies and the skin and stuff, and the eczemas and the autoimmunity, and like it's just fascinating when you realize that the bacteria in your gut is literally teaching your immune system what to respond to or not. It's just wonderful. Like it's such a complex system, and we know so little. We are in our infancy to understand the body. And having said that, when you zoom out and you do go back to basics, the body just wants to heal. We're like really in this wonderful healing machine that's just trying to like make us better all the time. And sometimes you have obstacles in the way, and sometimes we need to identify those obstacles. And very often it's diet. Very often it's what we put in our bodies as nutrition. And so just going back to basics and that, the body really wants to heal. And and kind of as I was sitting with a bit of tonight, one of the things that I've gone to sort of bring me back to my humanness has been poetry. And there are three pieces that I would kind of like to read at some stage. And I think there's the first one, I'll start with that. They kind of, the first one is called Hiding. I don't know if you guys have come across the work of John O'Donoghue. He is, I think he is born in Cork, England. But he's traveled, lives in Ireland for a while, and he lives in the United States at the moment. But if you've come across any of his work, or if you haven't, please find him. His work is amazing. His voice is so beautiful when he reads it with his beautiful accent. He has written a book called Consolations. One of his books is Consolations, and he's basically taken some everyday words and just gone a little bit into the deeper meaning of them. The book is Consolations, the solace, nourishment, and underlying meaning of everyday words. So he goes into words like friendship and love and anger, and he just goes a little bit into them. And one of the words that I find so beautiful is hiding. So I'm going to read this to you, and I think just like enjoy it. I think hiding is part of, I think, some of the small joys, some of the introverts, specifically, I've had a couple of introverts in the practice that say they had such joy in COVID when everything was just automatically cancelled. They didn't have to decline things. They didn't have to say no to invitations. They could just go in hiding. Hiding is a way of staying alive. Hiding is a way of holding ourselves until we are ready to come into the light. Even hiding the truth from ourselves can be a way to come can be a way to come to what we need in our own necessary time. Hiding is one of the brilliant and virtuoso practices of almost every part of the natural world. The protective quiet of an icy northern landscape, the held bud of a future summer rose, the snowbound internal pulse of the hibernating bear. Hiding is underestimated. We are hidden by life in our mother's womb until we grow and ready ourselves for our first appearance in the lighted world. To appear too early in that world is to find ourselves with the immediate necessity for outside intensive care. Hiding done properly is the internal faithful promise of a proper future emergence, as embryos, as children, and even as emerging adults in retreat from the names that have caught us and imprisoned us, often in ways where we have been too easily seen and too easily named. We live in a time of the dissected soul, the immediate disclosure, our thoughts, imaginings, and longings exposed to the light too much, too early, and too often. Our best qualities squeezed too soon into a world already awash with too easily articulated ideas that oppress our sense of self and our sense of others. What is real is almost always, to begin with, hidden, and doesn't want to be understood by the part of our mind that mistakenly thinks it knows what is happening. What is precious inside us does not care to be known by the mind in ways that diminish its presence. Hiding is an act of freedom from the misunderstanding of others, especially in the enclosing world of oppressive secret government and private entities attempting to name us, to anticipate us, to leave us with no place to hide and grow in ways unmanaged by a creeping necessity for absolute naming, absolute tracking, and absolute control. Hiding is a bid for independent from others. Hiding is a bid for independent from others, from mistaken ideas we have about ourselves, from an oppressive and mistaken wish to keep us completely safe, completely ministered to, and therefore completely managed. Hiding is creative, necessary, and beautifully subversive of outside interference and control. Hiding leaves life to itself, to become more of itself. Hiding is the radical independence necessary for our emergence into the light of a proper human future.
Oh, That's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Hey, thank you. It's beautiful. David White is, yeah, I love his work. So this idea, there's kind of a part, like I sort of felt a little bit like we could do this. This feels a lot like being in the womb, like he also mentions there, and the sort of story about life and death, and it's these thresholds really where things change for us,
Yeah.
and these thresholds are, they very often, we find ourselves in a place where suddenly everything's different. And look, I think one of the places where we have this is with a new diagnosis,
Yeah.
or a, yeah.
Exactly.
And I don't know if you want to, like, is there, what comes up for you if I say that? I mean, if you take yourself back to like getting a diagnosis of cancer, like,
And that's
yeah.
exactly as you were saying that, um, it was an opportunity of going back in,
Mm,
and once when one's been hiding, you re-emerge.
mm,
So what it brought to me quite soon, as soon as I got my diagnosis, and I'm sure there are a couple of us in the house, or all of us have gone through various, like you said, times in your life, different times. Yeah, if you look through the human cycle, the birthing, as we've been hidden and then we emerge.
mm,
Um, going through adolescence, there's the pre-adolescence, and then you go into this like sticky, awkward tunnel, and then you re-emerge, this a new young adult.
mm,
Going into sort of adulthood, and going into a diagnosis, going into 40s, going into menopause. So there was definitely, I mean, that's what maybe happens, sort of the yin and the yang. It's so intertwined, the light and the dark, but the birth and the death and the rebirthing. And I think in our lifetime we rebirth. A diagnosis is definitely, an intense diagnosis is one of the ultimate opportunities for rebirthing.
mm,
um,
mm,
it was the only way for me to look at it, so that
mm,
I could emerge anew. When you
mm,
go through these different phases in your life, you go through a hiding. um, you don't want to come out of it the same as when you went in.
mm,
You're
mm,
doing your hide, you recluse, you go inwards, so that you can change,
mm, mm.
whether you know it or not. But nobody wants to really come out of it exactly the same. There was a reason they went in. So yeah, that's definitely what came out for me.
Yeah, evolve or repeat, eh? That's what my husband said that to me in the week. It was like, evolve or repeat, Daph. And I was like, damn, that's simple. So I was just as you were talking now, so I then went and worked at home births for a while, for about 18 months, and um, found myself really exposed to our medical system from the outside. So I was working on the inside and experienced what it was like on the inside. And then from working with a home birth midwife, just seeing how incredibly unsupportive our system really is of women having choices, and women having their sort of birth choices. And yeah, just really having autonomy, like we've medicalized birth, and we're sitting in a country with, I think actually we are currently the highest rate of cesarean sections in the world. If we're not, yeah, we're right up there. We are sitting with currently our private sector. Let me add that. Our private sector, we're sitting at 75% cesarean sections per for the total number. It means 1 in 4 women still give birth vaginally in private sector. And it's, it's such a, wow, I think it's an enormous crisis that we're sitting in. When we look at, when we look at the simple things like understanding the microbiome and seeing how now we're realizing, oh my gosh, there's such like enormous like complexity, subtleties, fantastic, amazing, magical stuff that's going on. Do we really think that the way we're doing it now is the right way? I think, don't get me wrong, if there's an emergency, please let's cut. But if we're sitting in a place where there's women that are healthy and well, I think we're doing incredible disservice to the next generation. Because I think and not even I think, I know that there are, if you start looking at a little bit of the neurological awakening that happens during the positive stress that is birth. I mean, for the child, my gosh, it's a stressful experience. And I'm sure for some of you, you would have done some regression or birth regression work, and you like, you aware of the potential trauma. And I mean, that's a passage, right? That's one of those going from the womb. That's the first one. And going from that and through that, the fact that we most commonly make that is one of those.
Oh, where's Daphne gone?
That's a really difficult process. Even when things are damn tough, we can make it through it. So I'm seeing on my side, my internet's a little bit unstable. Can you tell me if there's anything, if I'm breaking up or if you're losing me? Let me know.
You did pause for about 5 seconds, but then you came back. So
okay, let's see how we go. I can try and see what I can do my side. If I need to swap to another, I tether because I live remotely. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where we are tinkering with processes where we certainly have not identified what they are yet. And I think we're doing a disservice to mothers in a really big way. Like it's a real rite of passage. So when you were speaking earlier about these things and these processes that we go through, we have removed the rites of passage from our society. Like we don't do the ritual anymore. Well, I guess for some religions we still do. Some of the more orthodox religions, if I look at some of the Judaic traditions, but mostly we've removed the rites of passage. And it's in these rites of passage that we come closer to ourselves and we come closer to who we are, and we shed our old story and our old skin, and we take on a new, and we embody what we kind of, I almost want to say we look at where we've come from and we take stock. I really think it's something that's worth thinking about, is when we're looking at young men, like do we want to encourage them to have some form of a rite of passage, or time in a mountain and going on a vision quest? Or when we're looking at a woman, like should we make a bigger fuss around starting a period? Should we like call a circle of women around her and make a moment of it, when we're looking at like the birth, obviously becoming a mother, it's a massive story and the big story of matrescence. And but then the next step is looking at the menopause. How can we bring back some of those moments of making a mark and drawing a line in the sand, and just making a moment of it? Life just happens, it just passes by, and if we don't make these moments and we don't have time.
Daphne, hopefully she'll come back. Getting so juicy there. Let's just see. I'm going to quickly send her a little. Oh, has she gone totally? Oh, there you are. So we did lose you.
Line in the sand, you see, line in the sand. We've done that. I don't know what you got and what you missed, but yeah, I think you're getting like, yeah. And I kind of want to say, if there's people that's listening, if there's something that feels like it resonates with you, or there's something that you I want to hear, like, what are people's thoughts? Because I mean, this is, you know, sort of my opinion, my observations, but I'd love to hear what people say and think. And are you in a place where you feel like you wish you had, or did you have some rite of passage? Were there moments in your life where you felt that was real thresholds for you, and things changed? You know, if there's someone that wants to jump in, that would be lovely.
That would be lovely. So please unmute yourselves. You can put something in the chat, or just wave and just join the conversation. It's really one of these evenings where it is about joining in. So Daphne Orkin is going to, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you so far, Daphne, and Elaine. When you said about, did you say it was David White that wrote the poem of hiding?
Yeah.
I got something else. But so I've listened a lot to him, but I haven't read this particular one. But when you said hiding, I have been hiding all my life in my way. But I have been also very visible to the outside, and I knew that. But hiding has been a great comfort to me. In Afrikaans, they called me Skelm. So they knew about it. And what was the other? And yeah, in Yiddish, they called it Dafka. So I was called names because then at least they could do something about something which they couldn't do anything about.
They could get a hold of you by calling you a name. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I was visible in my hiding, but as I say, I was also entertaining the family and dancing. But I've never heard this poem and what you say about it. So as I get older, I feel very much more at home with everything. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I want to ask you just, Daphne, a moment. How have you been hiding?
A lot under my blankets. I mean, that's real hiding. Yeah. And we had a very, very big mulberry tree in our back garden. We had many trees in our back garden, fruit trees that my parents planted as the children grew. We were only 3, but there were many more trees. And mine was a very big mulberry tree, and it's split into 2. So it was like my kingdom. And I was covered in mulberries, and I was right up against near the fence, and it was just like a sprawling, enormous tree. And I sat there for long times, and I was aware of everything going on at home. And I sat there, or I sat under the table watching my mother sewing, beautiful emboyer table. And so I stood behind the door and watched her cooking and baking. And yeah, so I kept watch, but not responsibly.
Yeah.
It was comforting.
Yes, it was a safe hiding.
Yes.
Oh, that's so lovely. Oh, thank you.
Very safe home.
Yeah. Thank you for telling about being in a tree. I definitely spent some good days in trees as well. We had camel thorn trees. The farm that I grew up on was called kameeldorings. So they were camel thorn trees, and many camel thorns were dug out of feet with my like sitting on my dad's lap. You know, he would take a menorah blade and sort of cut the top layers of the skin off till you get deep enough in, and then would like find that thorn and pull it out. But back to the trees, I had one friend specifically, and whenever they came and stayed, they would come and visit for like a week or so, and we would just spend days making home in the tree. And you know, there was the lounge and the dining room and the main bedroom, and it was so wonderful. And the one day myself and her went into the veld, and we always took a flask with tea, and we had an angry an ostrich male staying in the same camp as our tree, and we were unaware that they'd moved this male into the camp. And I was the chubby kid, and my friend Cecile was the tall, skinny, long-legged child. And we went into the veld in our bikinis. We were going to go like lie in our, like on our porch, you know, like lie and tan. And we were walking in the veld with our flask and in the little basket. And she went around the one way around the trasibos. What's a trasibos in English? I don't know, a trasibos. You know, like sort of a low bush with thorns in it. So she went around the one side and I went around the other side. And as I looked towards her, I saw this ostrich male charging towards us, and they're damn dangerous. So we basically, like, I mean, me, little chubby child, I sprinted for the fence. I flew, I don't actually know how I got over it, but I flew over it. And like Cecile got to it, and I absolutely like grabbed her and helped her over. And we were just in time. It was quite something with this like ostrich male. They do this thing sometimes when they get, I don't know if they get angry or they're trying to, yeah, he like ran up to the fence and then started doing this thing. And sure, yeah, it was quite a palaver. But yeah, thank you. You just reminded me of that story with your sitting in a tree story, Daphne. I appreciate it. Yeah.
I love that because it's amazing. It brought back a memory for you, Daphne, and then Daphne Orkin. Thank you for sharing, because the minute you said like hiding in trees, it also brought a memory back to me, and I realized how relevant it was. My youth, where I spent a lot of time next to my dad's house. There was an empty plot, and the road above where my dad's house, it wasn't built up yet. Nowadays it's very built up, but I had kind of the luxury of hiding in the mountain. It was the 70s, so it was safe. And I would literally at 4, 5 years old, 6 years old, go up into the mountain or next to the plot. And I was in the mountain, and and there were trees, and I would literally, it was my safe place. Things were kind of crazy growing up, and in the house. It wasn't a structure I wanted to be in for very long. So outside and in the trees, thank you for reminding me about it. And I was reminded when we went into lockdown. We had those ridiculous 2 hours, don't get me started there, but anyway, 2 hours of being allowed outside. And I live really close in Friedehoek to the mountain. Prior to the lockdown, I hadn't spent a lot of time walking the mountain alone because it's not safe, blah, blah, blah. So I'd often be on the beach, which I love and adore. But we were all, the whole neighborhood was walking on the mountain. And it just brought me right back to the 5-year-old who found safety in the mountain. And since then, I've been walking it, 3 times a week. I often walk alone. I feel, really, it's actually where I feel safe. That safety, that going back to that hiding place, and I literally had to leave the house because it was safer to be out there. So I was hiding in nature. What a wonderful place to have. It rebirthed me. And then coming into our lockdown time and re-walking the mountain and amongst the trees, I felt rebirthed. That is the inspiration of what allowed me to actually create things like these conversations and build up this platform, because every time I walk outside and I was in the mountain and in those amongst the trees again, it fed my creativity and sort of and hope again. So yeah, thank you for reminding me of where it actually all started from. I mean, it gave me such a great platform as a kid to express my creativity and paint, which I did as a career for 20 years. So yeah, just walking down memory lane. So I wanted to ask anybody else who's in the house that just wants to kind of share, where this conversation has led. If you feel, or what, going back to what Daphne was chatting about, the rituals that have been taken away, often through sort of the Western modalities. But what, you've brought into your family, or you had the opportunity during upbringing to experience. So I don't know if anybody wants to share. We would love to hear. Is there anybody else? I see there are a couple of chats, so I'm going to quickly check on the chats.
I'll continue talking from where you are on
Yes.
rebirth, because that was sort of where I ended up from the home birth environment. I found myself in a place where, as a doctor, the malpractice insurance, if more than 20% of your income is from births, our malpractice insurance is R1 million. It's like 900 and something thousand rand per year. It's crazy. So because we've become much more, the whole obstetric environment has become much more litigious, and we're really following the American, if you're looking at our the imprint that we're following, we're following the American system and this sort of medicalization of birth. So I found myself in a place where I didn't want to be feeding into that monster, and I kind of stepped into practice then as a homeopath GP. And I always, for a long time, I felt this really deep longing to be at birth again. And I still do. I think it's one of my, I think it's a real calling for me, but because of how unsupported birth in South Africa really is, it's actually really complex to be part of that, and it's very hard to be unsupported, and you really actually need an easy or a safe or a supportive, really is the word, a supportive environment to be able to refer back into. So I found myself in a place where I was kind of not being at birth, but I kind of caught the mothers and the babies on the other side. So I started seeing, because of the work in the birth field, I was connected to a lot of the home birth midwives in the Cape Town area, and I kind of got referrals from them for homeopathics, and I started working with the babies very often first, and sort of supporting the kids, especially around gut health. We're sitting in a time where your kids are just prescribed Nexium at the drop of a hat, antacids at the drop of a hat. It really impacts the gut microbiome. So I really try and support moms and babies to avoid that or come off it once they've started on it. We can definitely help them. And I found myself sort of starting with the kids, and then sort of later getting the moms in this postpartum time, and sort of this time of matrescence and exhaustion, 18 months in, and helping them, supporting them with adrenals and thyroid and gut health. And sometimes the dads get brought in. So really, I ended up growing a family practice, and I found myself always with this sort of longing and this sort of voice, the calling to be back at births, until the one day I had a man that came in to see me, and he was on the brink of marrying the wrong woman, but he couldn't break it off. And he was in the job that he absolutely despised, and he was overweight, and he was not exercising, and his food was, because of the high pressure of work, he was constantly just doing fast food, and it was really in a bad place, and he had insulin resistance and a fatty liver, and just really unwell. And we started working, and within a period of time, he's moved house, broke off the engagement, started eating whole food. Like, he'd really just done the work. Sometimes it's like things just align, and I can't heal you, but I can tell you what I've learned, and you can incorporate it or not. And if you're ready to incorporate it, things can shift. So he was ready, and he really just went with it. And he made such incredible shifts within 8 months, 8 weeks, and things had really shifted. His numbers on his bloods had improved. He wasn't insulin resistant anymore. His fatty liver was slowly getting better. And he just looked at me and he said, "Thank you so much. It feels like you've held me for a rebirth." And I was like, oh my gosh, I am at births. I'm just able to be with births for men and for women, and I'm able to hold space, and I'm able to sort of guide and hold and support. And if you're ready, we can rebirth. It was really so lovely. I felt so like, oh, it was actually such a relief for me, and I was so excited. Like I just remember feeling like that in itself was it felt like I was released from something, because I had this kind of guilt sitting with like, what am I like, am I just too afraid, or like, where's my courage, must I just be in the birth and be with these women and hold the space. And it was just such a wonderful relief that I'm still at births. and yeah, and I have been sort of called back to the birthing space intermittently, and I think for me it's just about holding a little bit less tightly onto the titles. Like I've been at births as a doula, and I've been there as, like just as a support. I've been the sort of backup GP sitting on the lounge, sitting on my hands, looking at the cat, listening to the woman. And it really has served me a lot to just to let go a little bit of the seriousness of the titles that we carry. This sort of, you can kind of laugh at yourself for it. And in that, we find a freedom, and we find a freedom to move and a freedom to breathe. And what's coming up for me is this idea of, because we have moved away, or not everyone, but we certainly as a society overall, there's less religion, and there's less. I come back to this idea of things that anchor us, whether it's the ritual or the religion or the system that you subscribe to. And because we've moved away from these systems, we kind of hooked and allured by the isms, and we see these things, the veganism and the vegetarianism and the carnivorism and all the isms are the things that we kind of now identify, and I stand with them, so and if I'm thinking of like sort of being lighter and letting go of and being flexible around the sort of titles, this kind of a thing that I sort of feel into, because the body is, we go through stages and phases. And there's a wonderful line from Natasha Campbell McBride, the woman that wrote the GAPS diet, if you've come across any of her work. She says plants are cleansers and animal products are builders. And I thought that is such a simple way of putting it. If you're looking at little kids, when we're busy building bones and brains, let's give them some animal products. And if you're in a place where you're struggling with things and you're feeling toxic and overloaded, go for the plants, but do you have to like tie your identity to how you eat? I don't think that's necessary. I think we can be a little bit lighter around these things, and find a different place to hold a different place that you can trust, a different place that you can find your anchor, and I find that if the body starts showing us signs that there's not enough of whatever nutrients we need, let's look at where we can get them from our food, because we can find them. And I think it's about coming into a place of just gently listening.
Learning how to, though. I think that's the thing that people often want to know, like how do they learn to listen when there's so much within the Western realm of medicine that doesn't teach you that at all. It removes you from that. If Western medicine were to teach you how to, if your average doctor that you went to, Western doctor, taught you, well, let's listen to your body, they would be out of practice. Probably, or see you less often. So it's doctors like you that can rebirth that within people, and I think that's the era we're in. We actually, I mean, it's, for whatever reason this time happened and was created, but this, corona thing, there was this going into the womb to a degree, going into hiding, and then there's an opportunity to rebirth, how you choose to come out of that. But in that coming out, the way you looking at healing and health is the way forward in terms of where people need to go now, the integration of health. So I think this is the time, like the rebirthing time of our healing. So exactly on track with where you are we need more of you, more of that attitude towards our health and bodies.
There's this, I'm going to read the next poem because it feels like this is the right place. It's by John O'Donoghue. I see someone commented that the previous one was by John O'Donoghue. So John O'Donoghue and David White were very close friends, and they described themselves as bookends. And the one was a poet philosopher, and the other one's a philosopher poet, and they're very wonderful conversationalists. And if you listen to podcasts on the On Being podcast with Krista Tippett, there's a beautiful conversation with John O'Donoghue there on beauty, and it's really worth a listen. I think if this resonates with you. So this is when we're listening to the body, and I'm kind of tying back a little bit to having these thresholds. And often nowadays, illness is the place where when we're faced with our vulnerability, we have a moment to look and to reassess. And John O'Donoghue was Irish, and he, as the nature of being an Irishman, a couple of the pieces that he wrote were blessings. And this one is a blessing for a friend on the arrival of illness. So let me read this to you. Now is the time of dark invitation, beyond a frontier that you did not expect. Abruptly, your old life seems distant. You barely noticed how each day opened a path through fields never questioned, yet expected deep down to hold a treasure. Now is the time of deep, dark invitation beyond a frontier that you did not expect. Abruptly, your old life seems distant. You barely noticed how each day opened a path through fields never questioned, yet expected deep down to hold treasure. Now your time on earth becomes full of threat. Before your eyes, your future shrinks. You lived absorbed in the day-to-day, so continuous with everything around you that you could forget you were separate. Now this dark companion has come between you. Distances have opened in your eyes. You feel that against your will, a stranger has married your heart. Nothing before has made you feel so isolated and lost. When the reverberations of shock subside in you, may grace come to restore you to balance. May it shape a new space in your heart to embrace this illness as a teacher who has come to open your life to new worlds. May you find in yourself a courageous hospitality toward what is difficult, painful, and unknown. May you use this illness as a lantern to illuminate the new qualities that will emerge in you. May your fragile harvesting of this slow light help you release whatever has become false in you. May you trust this light to clear a path through all the fog of old unease and anxiety until you feel arising within you a tranquility profound enough to call the storm to stillness. May you find the wisdom to listen to your illness. Ask it why it came, why it chose your friendship, where it wants to take you, what it wants you to know, what quality of space it wants to create in you, what you need to learn to become more fully yourself, that your presence may shine in the world. May you keep faith with your body, learning to see it as a holy sanctuary, which can bring this night wound gradually towards the healing and freedom of dawn.
Beautiful.
Mm. You know, so often we find ourselves fighting against and pushing against. And when there's, no, this is with illness, but with difficult times as well, you know, whatever they are, whether they're difficult relationships or time of financial strain or whatever it is, you know, like we find ourselves, our first, and this is part of the learning from the medical system, is our first impulse is to resist it. And in the resistance is exhausting. If you can find in yourself a way of welcoming and calling in and asking them to come in and sit at the table and be here as part of the story, you know, I think it's an allowing in, you know, it's an allowing a curiosity. If we can keep the curiosity of what's going on, why am I in this place, you know, what's brought this here, and sort of just lightly taking full responsibility for it, because no one else has done this, most likely. And this, the journey up to this point is not a mistake, it's not a lie, it's just where you are, you know. I think if we can softly accept it instead of fighting it and resisting it and pushing it away, a lot of the energy is available. Instead of the resisting, a lot of the energy is available to do some of the healing and some of the reinvigorating for the next day. Yeah.
I'm going to just quickly jump in because it's such a it's so close to home, you know, when he says, you know, invited in as a guest, invited in. It's really the most powerful thing you can do. And if you see it as, you know, because the minute you say invited in, there's a softness as opposed to repel it. The minute you use the concept in your mind as a guest or a visitor, temporary, it's not permanent. You know it's temporary, no matter what, and no matter what the outcome. And when you use those two adjectives, or those two nouns actually, there's a coming together, you and it, you and a diagnosis, you and a difficult time, you and a challenge. Then you work together, because the minute you work together, there's healing. The minute you separate and you pull yourself apart, there's pain. It was really, in my experience, that was the truest association I had with my diagnosis. And the minute it arrived, I saw it as that. You used the word curious, and I really couldn't agree more. Once you cultivate curiosity and you're curious about something, there's something to learn. So it really, really, really resonated so well. It's definitely to guide people through trying to find that aspect of challenges, generally in life, but definitely within their health. That helped so much.
Yeah, and I think to have space for curiosity, we might have to go into hiding, because we're so bombarded all the time. You know, I've been so struck by how incredibly absorbed people are in their phones. And where we're living at the moment, we're along the coast on the garden route, and it's quite isolated. So we don't. I see people when I go to town, and I'm so struck by how absorbed people are on their phones. People walking on the side of the road, people, like, just everyone, you know. And there's no space really to become curious about your life if you're just busy being bombarded.
Mm.
So it's a real thing. And I mean, I'm sure it's certainly not like I'm a saint not on my phone, you know, like of course I find myself kind of, but I catch myself and I just like put it down, you know, like you can't, like it's amazing how it's so carefully and 100% designed to catch you and addict us, you know, to get us addicted. And so it's to know that we gotta just, of course we will get addicted to it. This is what it was designed, it literally is designed for that. So how do we make some intentional space? My husband is Jewish and his family's Orthodox practicing, and it's quite like remarkable when we spend time with them on Shabbos and there's no one on a phone. You know, we had a big event. His nephew had his bar mitzvah and not a photo was taken. You know, it was like, oh my goodness, feels wrong. You know, it's so interesting how far we've moved that it actually feels strange to not have these devices around and on us. And so it's so, I think, you know, just how do we intentionally create space so that there's so that this curiosity even has the possibility to peek its head out, you know. And I think to, like you were saying, walking on the mountain, of course, just connecting to nature and being in nature. We are nature, we've managed to forget it, but if we can just connect and connect to nature and become mindful a little bit of the cyclicalness that this like natural rhythms that we're part of, I think that already brings us into a place of just finding some stillness.
Yeah.
Finding some stillness.
I would definitely say, you know, manifesting or creating a healthy lifestyle, implementing connection to nature daily, unless the weather doesn't allow you to, is crucial. Actually, you know, and it doesn't need to be an hour if you don't have it. It can be 15 minutes, but just some kind of connection, barefoot or just walking, or just that was the thing that was the most, that along with eating really good wholesome food, um, my connection with nature daily and eating well were probably the two top things that accelerated my healing. And then to integrate that into a lifestyle. Um, then we start connecting all the parts. You know, health is really, it's definitely, it's not a commercial, it's a full-time feature film, you know.
That's a line. Yeah.
I worked in film for so long, so it's just like, but it really is, you know. I was chatting to somebody today who was talking about um, health conditions with his mom, he himself, high sugar levels, and he spoke about a month where he went off sugar and he ate properly and lost a lot of weight, and then it crept up. And but you know, the bottom line was, I said, it's not about a month of deciding to do well. It's about looking at how you integrate it into your lifestyle and making it work for your lifestyle. But there are things, you know, part of doing, merging with nature, spending time with it is such a crucial aspect for it, because there's that element of space, because what it did was it gave me space. So you're right, it's becoming aware, and you know, and then working with professionals that can support you in this process, because when we just do this alone, it could be quite overwhelming. So I mean, I know, you know, what I love that you're doing is really bridging that gap of that clinical, instead of the clinical approach to the human body um, and health, uh, rather looking at you know, Western medicine looking at disease, and integrated medicine, you know, integrated work looking at health. So it's kind of like that in order for us to come together more and to ask questions and to allow allow yourself to sort of be led if there's difficulty of walking this road solo. I think that's why this integrative approach is so important.
Absolutely, yeah. And I find myself very often working with other practitioners, especially very often with the nutritionists or health coaches. And, I think we think we can do things alone, but we really don't have to. It really improves our chances of success when we allow our hand to be held for a while. A bit of an accountability buddy, and just someone that maybe knows a little bit more than you about this, and this actually has your back, and I find that really helps. It really helps if there's someone that can we work as a bit of a bigger team.
Holding the village as well.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, the last poem that I have is for grief, and I kind of, I don't know why, but it was a bit of a birth, like life, illness and death process for me when I was thinking about tonight. And I don't know if I necessarily need to read this unless you want me to. But the story of death, I think I often, if it's appropriate, I would encourage people to speak about death and to normalize it. It's like, man, it's like birth and death. They're the two things that are inevitables, and we really have alienated them so well. And I think death can be, especially for the people around and the people present, can be a really transformative process. I think a good death they're hard to come by, because we've medicalized things so much. And especially now in this time, like what we've gone through with COVID, I was so devastated thinking of the people dying alone, and thinking of the family members and what they've missed out on. And I recently was in a group where there was another doctor, and she was one of the frontline workers at Somerset Hospital. And man, I tell you what the frontline workers went through is unbelievable, actually. And she herself, I mean, if I think of an average night, he would probably, if you're on call in a month, say 6 nights on a month, you would probably certify a person dead. It so varies which rotation you're in. I mean, obviously in internal medicine, slightly more often, but I'd say once every 2 months, or depends where you're working. And it's certainly not something that you do every night. And this colleague just said to me, they were certifying between 14 to 16 people a night. So yeah, like really just, and you're on a weekend of nights, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, and you just get called, like initially, apparently they didn't even do resuscitations, and because they just didn't know what to do, and there wasn't really anything. And I just think in the context that I met her, we were both in a sort of a process where we were dealing with things, and it was a really I looked at her and I just thought, you're so brave to actually make time for yourself, because I know how little time there is to deal with what we experience in our training. And I look at my colleagues currently still in the system, and I really feel sad. I feel sad that they don't, it's this thing of not knowing what we don't know. It's just normal and everyone's doing it, and it's just your turn. We actually had the saying, it's not your fault, it's just your turn. If we come back on a night in the emergency room and the next morning you're there and there's a massive pile waiting, like, you can't really be angry at people, but you kind of, okay, it's not your fault, it was just your turn, it was a really busy night. But you find yourself kind of turning from status asthmaticus patient that can't breathe, like you settle them and resuscitate and settle them and get them to ICU, and then you turn around and there's this like mother that comes running in with a child with burns wound, and you like help and cover and like sort them out, and then you like turn around and there's like a woman that's had a septic abortion and now you've got to deal with her, and then you sort them out, and then you turn around, there's someone there with constipation at 3 in the morning, you're like, what the hell are you doing in the ER for constipation? And they're like, we've been waiting here since 11 o'clock yesterday morning. And you're like, fine, I'll see you at 3 for your damn constipation. And you turn around and there's someone that gets brought in just past 2. They had like a heart attack. Of course, we have heart attacks happening between 1 and 2 in the morning. So the heart attack gets rushed in, and you know, there's just no time. It's just like, you just turn around and it's just folder and folder and folder and folder, and you just like pick up and deal and pick up and deal and pick up and you know, by the end of the night like that, you go home and you like, you just want to sleep. There's no time to deal with any of that. And you do that again tomorrow night, and you do that again tomorrow night, and then you, yay, like weekend off, like you're only on again by Thursday, and then that weekend you're off, and the following weekend you're only working Saturday, and you know, like it's just unrelenting. And why am I talking about this now again? I often feel like people need to know the intensity of it, you know, so that you can have compassion for the person sitting in front of you that's with a shut heart. So I think I'm careful to...
With death is where we started.
Yeah, sure. But I'm careful. I don't want to badmouth the system, but I want you to understand what people go through. And I want you to have compassion for the people if you ask them a question and all they have is 10 minutes to see you. So get into a place where you can understand where it's at. And if that's not working for you, then move to someone else that's got time for you. But, you know, this sort of exposure to death and exposure to, we become so hardened to it. So when you find yourself, I found myself in the ICU next to my dad's bed, and he had fallen, and he had fallen walking on the farm, and he had fallen, and his foot, he kind of tripped over a rock and he fell, and they missed that he had ruptured his spleen. And being the hard-headed, cantankerous, obstinate man that he was, didn't want to listen to me when I said, go and have it checked out. Maybe you fractured a rib or something. And he spent the first night at home and was in a lot of pain. And my mom, being the nurse that she is, she was kind of nursing him. And on the second morning when he woke up at home and he was still in excruciating pain, I said, please just go in, just let them see if there's anything more. And you know, it turned out that he had ruptured his spleen, and he didn't break his ribs, but because of they missed the diagnosis of the ruptured spleen, and he was basically shunted to ICU to give him a blood transfusion. And he spent the night having 3 or 4 units of blood run into his body. And the next morning when my mom got there, his abdomen was distended, and they'd basically run it straight from the vein through the spleen into the gut because they missed a diagnosis. And he ended up through a sort of very up and down 6-week period, getting into a place of, he died after 6 weeks in ICU. And it was just so incredibly frustrating being in the system, in the receiving end, and seeing how I would ask the nephrologist that came to help with doing some, goodness, what is the word? My terminology has left me when people, when the kidneys have failed and we go in for dialysis. When I asked the nephrologist, how's my dad? And he would say, his kidneys are looking better. And I would turn to the gastroenterologist that would like try and help with things, and they couldn't answer me. No one could tell me how my dad was doing. And it was just, you know, I kind of, they would say like, no, sorry, I'm just the gastro, like, but ask Dr. So-and-so. And I'm like, how's my dad? And he'd be like, his heart is fine. Look, I'm the cardiologist, but can you ask the internal, like the physician, you know? And it was just such a clear example of how there wasn't care for the human being. And yeah, it was a very frustrating process and a painful process, you know, like, and standing on the other side of it, kind of realizing, like, I have real empathy for people that have gone through this process, and they sit and they tell their story, and you just realize how desperate we are when we're standing at the bedside table we're standing at the bedside of a sick loved one, and no one can tell us how the hell our people are doing. You know, like, it's so sad that we're sitting in a place and this is just the norm. So I think this leads me into the poem For Grief, and this is also by John O'Donoghue, and this is certainly a poem that as I went through this sort of process of grief, at different times when I read it, different things kind of caught my eye. So let me read it to you. For Grief by John O'Donoghue. When you lose someone you love, your life becomes strange. The ground beneath you gets fragile, your thoughts make your eyes unsure, and some dead echo drags your voice down where words have no confidence. Your heart has grown heavy with loss, and though this loss has wounded others too, no one knows what has been taken from you when the silence of absence deepens. Flickers of guilt kindle regret for all that was left unsaid or undone. There are days when you wake up happy, again inside the fullness of life, until the moment breaks and you are thrown back onto the black tide of loss. Days when you have your heart back, you are able to function well, until in the middle of work or encounter, suddenly with no warning, you are ambushed by grief. It becomes hard to trust yourself. All you can depend on now is that sorrow will remain faithful to itself. More than you, it knows its way and will find the right time to pull and pull the rope of grief until that coiled hill of tears has reduced to its last drop. Gradually, you will learn acquaintance with the invisible form of your departed. And when the work of grief is done, the wound of loss will heal, and you will have learned to wean your eyes from the gap in the air and be able to enter the hearth in your soul where your loved one has awaited your return all the time. That's it.
His writing is so spot on.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Hey, sure, really captures it so well.
He really does, yeah.
Mm.
And it is, I mean, as you say, it is an important important reality that we should try and discuss more, because having gone through one of the things, going through or getting a serious diagnosis, one of the things that I felt one is confronted with is looking at death, and your relationship with it. And mostly because, for the most part, certainly in Western cultures, it is a topic of avoidance, which
Absolutely.
we really, which makes it the struggle that much more, So,
Feeds
it
into that.
isn't,
Yeah, into that.
it isn't the responsibility of your doctors to teach you about death. It's a topic for of society. It's a topic. It's of human nature. For us to be alive, we need to discuss and embrace the idea of death more. I found that a very a crucial part of my healing to come to terms with understanding or looking at what I understood of death. It made it much easier. It made me come out of it, not fear it. So it is an integrative part, I feel, of I don't know, maybe a renewed education as we walk forward, looking at our health.
It's very hard. I think it's also hard when you start looking at I just had someone in the practice the other day that her brother had passed away and her folks are both still alive. And, you know, this sort of order of things, you sort of get thrown by it, you know, this sort of idea that, of course, the elders would die first. And it's part of this not having a conversation about it, you know, like normalizing and realizing that it could be any time, you know, like we don't know that we're going to live tomorrow. So, yeah, I think just... again, it's one of those that should come and sit at the table. You know, death should be right here. So I think something like Dia de Muertos, what is it, the Day of the Dead, you know, what is it, Dias de Muertos? That's not right, but whatever that is, the Day of the Dead, you know, like bringing the dead, celebrating the ancestors, like becoming aware of where we've come from, like bringing them into the present and talking about it and kind of just getting like, I think kind of lightening up around it a bit, you know, it doesn't have to be a heavy thing. It's like, it's coming, you know, whether you fear it or not, or avoid it or not. So I think it's one of those things to allow and to invite in and be curious about. Yeah.
Absolutely. It definitely was one of the most comforting and sort of maybe empowering things that I visited personally when I went through my time of treatment. I mean, I chose to connect with you know, through a medium, and I had a very strong connection with my family and my father, and I do still, but it really helped me understand things so much more that it really left me with no fear of death,
Mm. Mm.
which is a huge thing. It just accelerated. So I wasn't stopping my healing in my body by
Mm.
fearing death.
Mm.
That
Mm.
would have been quite an obstacle. And it's, you know, I know it's easier said than done, but like you say, to normalize that conversation.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah. Thank you so much for all your wisdom and everything you've shared. I know, I don't know if you've been reading, but the chats have been kind of ongoing, just sharing how much they've enjoyed your conversation, your wisdom, your creativity. And you are so right. It's in the stories that we heal.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
it's such a pivotal part of it. So from you know, I know that it's getting late. I wanted to just put out, if anybody has just one question, if there's somebody that has one question or one comment, I know it's getting late for Daphne, that they want to just share before we sign off. Everybody seems quite content. You see, that's the thing about being in the kitchen. It's about the storytelling. So um, Daphne, thank you from the bottom of my heart. That was the most divine evening. I just love being in conversation with you, and would like to extend any time. You are welcome to come back and let's chat again. And when I'm in your side of the world, I'd love to visit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
That would be so lovely. So good luck with everything.
Thank
And
you.
and
Thanks,
thank you
everyone.
for
Thanks for,
joining me this evening.
yeah, thanks everyone for listening. And yeah, I hope that there's a little something that you think about or that sits with you. And maybe not, maybe you just leave it right here. But yeah, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I don't take attention for granted. And life is precious and time is precious. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Only a pleasure.
Cool.
Thank you. Go well, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, cool. Nice to see some familiar faces. Yeah, lots of love. Okay.
Love you. Lots of love.
Bye bye.
Bye.